I think a good thing. Keep people moving around and shift everybody, you know, nobody knows what they're going to expect.
Oh, but there's a Tom McLaughlin in there, so
Change is good.
Yeah.
Ah, there he is.
Hello.
Susan.
No, that's Mike. I thought I saw Mike
There you
in
are.
here. Didn't I put it somewhere? Yep. There, okay.
hard to tell from this angle.
I know.
So if we have an official member coming late, should I seat an alternate?
I would. I dare.
That's what I thought, but
Yeah.
getting the official.
I mean, I don't know if that's official, but that's what I would do. Just to make sense.
I don't think there's any.
It
Well,
doesn't
it's the
read.
minutes, but like otherwise.
And the minutes are first, so you might as well
Just as a heads up,
seat someone who.
it is the presentation's going to be on the TV, but it's also, you can have the printout. So depending on if you want to follow along or watch it live, either way is fine. But just want to give a heads up.
Sit on the end here. Turn my name
There he is.
towards me, like I don't
That
know.
was him, is it?
who I am.
Mike walking by?
That was Mike, yep.
Okay. We'll give him a sec before we start.
Remember to bring my glasses.
No, I was gonna say something inappropriate, so I'm just biting my tongue.
Let it rip, come on.
There you go.
Entertain us.
Joseph, do you need me to sign that?
Maybe he's
I
still
do, yep. I
anticipating
have a
me.
signature for you right here.
I got it yesterday.
That's what I was
Very
gonna
nice.
say, but
We'll have everyone. Well,
Sneaking it in
That's
under the
not
wire.
nearly as
Yes.
No, it could be a lot worse, but
all
I
right,
just,
we have.
it came out
I
a
thought I was
lot
gonna get in last week, but got it before the meeting.
less inappropriate than
Okay.
I
A
originally
majority,
thought it
we
would.
were legal certified, everything else is just because we want to, you know, have everybody involved, but legal minimum is just half, or 50% plus one.
I think I just saw Mike walk by. Like,
Oh, okay.
we'll give him a sec too.
Yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah.
That's him, right? There we go.
I think that's what 5 minutes past. I feel like my clock. My
This
watch.
I have 6:32.
Okay, then maybe my clock is correct. My car is slow. That's what's going on. I just got a little confusion this morning.
There he is.
How are you, Mike?
Hello.
Hey,
Hello.
Good evening.
I'll give you the same disclaimer I gave Mark. You can, if you want to follow along on a printed presentation, it'll be up on the screen, which is behind you, or you can look on a paper. So if you wanted to sit on that side, you could see. If you want to sit over here, you can just follow along on paper. It's the same presentation either way. So your call.
I don't know, if I were Sue, I'd be kind of offended.
No offense
Everybody's
taken,
avoiding
really.
It's a hard seat to get to.
What's that?
It's a hard seat to get to.
It is, and this vent seems to want to always blow on that.
Yeah. Glad Mike is there tonight.
All right. It is 6:33, and I'm calling this planning board meeting of October 6th to order. I will begin by reading the roll. John, I am present. Rebecca,
I'm here.
Phil,
Here?
Neil seems to be absent. Mike Ahern,
Here.
Mark,
Here?
Susan,
Here.
and alternate members. Zach, select board alternate. Michael Bouchard.
Here.
Peter Julia is absent. And Guy.
Here.
All right.
I think we're at a disadvantage. We can't seat a regular alternate for a select board vacancy. So we'll have to
Yeah.
be one down tonight.
Which I think is okay.
Yeah.
We'll get through it.
Hopefully it won't be too contentious.
Yeah.
These minutes.
All right. First up is the review of minutes from the September 15th meeting.
I had 2 edits. Well, one is Jenny Tebow spoke twice, and her name is spelled differently in both times. I'm not sure if either is correct because I don't know how to spell it, but I think to to make sure we know it's the same person.
Mhm.
I feel like it might be Thibeault.
I believe that's
I
correct.
think so.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, I just pulled that out somewhere. Yeah, so anyway, and then the other one is on page 4, in the public comment section, the second third paragraph. It says, Hammond Rowan also noted that the planning board's meetings are on YouTube shortly after they occur and are on request until approved. And I think that means the minutes are on request until approved.
I had the same note to myself.
Okay.
Minutes are
Got there
available
before you, yeah.
on request.
All right, well, that takes care of my comments as well.
On that same page, at the very top, Don Smilak, his last name is spelled S-M-I-A-L-E-K.
I-A-L.
S-M-I-A-L-E-K.
Got it.
Thank you. And there's the first of the T-bows after that.
Any other comments?
I move that we approve these minutes as amended.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the September 15th minutes as amended. Any further discussions or comments? All in favor?
I,
Aye.
Aye. Abstain? No. Opposed? Sorry. We skipped one. No. And abstain.
Abstain.
All right. The minutes are approved. Got to use the gavel.
Yeah, the gavel on that one.
I did.
Yeah.
Gotta start using the gavel more often.
These are comments of support, not mockery.
Yeah.
All right. Next up are public comments not related to items on our agenda this evening. Are there any public comments? No. All right. And nothing on Zoom either, right? No? Okay. So next up we have a public presentation on the Stormwater Asset Management Program. And I think, Joseph, you might have a few words to say to introduce the presentation before we introduce our speakers.
Yeah, sure thing. So a little background. The town of Plymouth was awarded $30,000 from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services to create an asset management program for our stormwater drainage system. So this meeting tonight is sort of the big public presentation about this program, creating and implementing a asset management program. You know, it's an opportunity to learn about the drainage system and help us to establish a vision for its future, you know, making sure that it's something that's going to keep serving our community well into the future. So, you know, on the line with us, we have a few folks. It looks like Sarah Ridyard and Sharon Nall, who are from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. We also have Justin Skelly and Dave Prickett, who are from DPC Engineering. DPC Engineering is the town's engineering consultant on this project, and they've put together a little presentation to give some background. Justin Skelly, I don't know if you'd like to kick off with anything.
Yeah, no, that's a good introduction. I've been working mainly with Joseph and June, as well as your highway department, you know, in kicking the project off. We just had an internal, you know, project planning kickoff, a few weeks ago now. So this is, like Joseph said, is kind of our first presentation to the public, kind of let everybody know, you know, what we'll be doing over the next several months, and kind of a vision for how it's all going to come together and be delivered. So I will, Joseph, if you're okay with it, just share my screen here, which it looks like I'm able to.
Sounds good.
I know it might be a little tough in the room, but it sounds like you have handouts, so that's great.
Does anybody, does everyone have a handout or want a handout? There, some right up here.
And they're also available on the back table, and anybody wants one from up here.
Okay. So as Joseph said, this is really the public informational session for the Stormwater Asset Management Program, funded through a grant with New Hampshire DES, or Principal Forgiveness, I should say. I'm going to hop into it. Some of the topics for tonight, and again, feel free to make this interactive. Stop me, whenever you feel like it's a good time to interject, ask questions. Otherwise, obviously I'll open it up at the end, but feel free to stop me as we go through this. So some of the goals I wanted to touch on tonight were getting kind of an overview of what Plymouth has for our stormwater system. Maybe even before that, just give everybody a primer, what is a stormwater system? What goes into that, at its very basic principles. Secondly, we'll talk about asset management and why this is kind of the buzzword in the industry, whether it's wastewater, drinking water, stormwater, why it's important and why regulators are pushing this, and why it's a good idea for communities to get involved and start, putting these programs together for all of their varied utilities. Well, I shouldn't just say buried, above ground too. So then we'll get into more specifically about Plymouth's asset management plan, kind of what's going to go into this specific plan for the town, some upcoming milestones that we have, and then talk about the next steps. And like I said, we'll feel free, depending on how Joseph wants to open this up and have discussion towards the end for questions. So like I said, just a primer on stormwater systems for those who aren't familiar. It's pretty basic, right? It rains, the water's got to go somewhere. So what doesn't make it into the ground, it runs off. So there's a lot more impervious area, whether it's pavement, homes, buildings, etc. And that stormwater needs to be managed. Ultimately, like in this nice little diagram I found here, it all ends up into a receiving water at some point. So how do we protect those receiving waters? As that stormwater makes its way from a catch basin, where it enters it along the street, that runoff could contain sediment, it could contain nutrient loadings, etc. that will, eventually make it downstream, entering, a river, a stream, and that could potentially impact, the environment from there. So the stormwater system is basically made up of those inlets and outlets. So catch basins, you've all walked past them or driven over them. The manholes that connect those, series of pipes and catch basins. The manhole structures that are similar to, sewer manholes where you drive over the lid. I'm sure everybody hits those daily. And then there's the outlets and culverts, etc. that actually delivers that water, out to the receiving streams. To the left, I just had a picture of a culvert that we recently worked on in Massachusetts. So that's a brand new culvert that we installed on a project. At its simplest point, the water comes in, you're trying to remove sediment, like in this bottom right diagram I took from Joseph. I really liked it. It essentially shows how you're trying to keep any floatables and trash, that may enter, basically keep them within the structure so that could be cleaned out as part of your regular operation and maintenance of the system. So that'll be a point to talk about, because we do find, just like any utility, that staffing and other factors sometimes don't always result in, the most timely O&M and get things cleaned when it needs to be. So floatables, sediment, etc., you remove those. Then, there's different levels, obviously, of stormwater management. To the left, I show like a big retention system. They'll put these under the parking lots at a Walmart or other, large impervious systems. And it's essentially a way to recharge, that stormwater slowly into the subsurface. And then you could go as far as, treatment systems for stormwater to, like I said, remove nutrients and other contaminants of concern. So there's all sorts of levels, obviously, to stormwater systems. I think for the purposes of this program, we'll be talking about mainly inlet structures, outlet structures, manholes, and then the pipes that interconnect between all of those systems. So that was a lot, but that's just kind of an overview of, what is stormwater, what does it do, and we're going to be looking at Plymouth's system, obviously, to evaluate, what is the condition of your current asset. A lot of communities, whether it's, like I said, drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, these pipes were put in, they're under the ground, they're out of sight, they're out of mind. As long as things are working properly, it's great. When things go wrong, that's when you hear about it. So the whole goal of asset management is to get ahead of that, have a plan, both financially and, from a management standpoint, so you don't get hit with unexpected, emergency costs down the road. So, like I said, Plymouth's existing stormwater system. So this was information that we started out with from the statewide asset data exchange service, SADES. I probably butchered the actual statewide asset data exchange system. So they actually did a lot of work for the town of Plymouth mapping their existing system. And that's really just like a raw export of their data here. Obviously, we have to import, more in terms of pipes and connections to these structures. But just high level, we're able to show that the town has approximately 12.5 miles of storm drain pipe. So we're going to have to basically inventory and catalog each, piece of pipe within that. And then there's approximately 1,700 structures. And those, like I was talking about earlier, are composed of catch basins, manholes, and then inlet and outlet structures. So this is really the backbone of the Plymouth stormwater system. To the surprise of no one, the more densely populated areas, Main Street, etc., that's where you kind of see the densest parts of the system. And then as you get out to the more rural type areas, things are a little bit more spread out. So, the key will be making sure we evaluate things and we put things all on a level playing field in terms of where the town's priorities should be for making improvements, over the next 10, 20 years, and have a plan for that. So that's just an overview of what the town has currently, and that's what we're going to be tackling as part of this project. So I guess I'm just going to stop there for a second. So that was kind of an introduction to stormwater management, an introduction to, just what the town has for a stormwater system. I guess, does anybody want to, kind of talk about any of those topics at this point? Or you want me to keep going?
I do have a quick question.
Oh, yeah.
In more of the rural areas, I'm presuming those are primarily just culverts, not catch basins. Is that the case?
That is the case,
All right,
typically.
thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay. I'll keep it moving. So asset management at its core, what is this? This has been a buzzword in the industry, the past 5 years or so. Every state has their own program for giving money out to communities to start really investing in this. So why are we going to do it? What is the benefit? EPA basically put together this graphic. I use it all the time. I love it. Essentially, walking through the upper graph here is what's always been done historically, right? You have an asset, whatever it is. We can just talk generally. You have an asset, you put it in, you run it until it breaks or needs to be replaced, and you do that. You wait until it fails. You wait till a pipe breaks. You wait till there's a sinkhole in the road, and you have some high level of replacement cost down the road. The new way of thinking about things is, well, over that same period, can you be doing, these minor steps in terms of like O&M costs? So keeping up on things, whether it's operationally or performing, levels of maintenance. And yes, there's obviously some cost to that. But then when you get to the end of the planning window, the cost to rehabilitate or sometimes replace, a lot of this stuff we can just rehabilitate in place now, just given the technologies for pipelining. They can even epoxy line structures. So there's a lot of things now with technology. You don't have to dig open a road to replace or, correct deficiencies. So that cost, when you get to the end of the period is much less. And EPA typically says this upper, model here, when you run it into the ground, that emergency repair is typically 3 to 5 times more costly if you wait till that point, over that 20-year window. So it really just drives home. It's a good idea financially. It's a good idea so the town can, plan out what the expenses are going to be to maintain a system, over the coming years. And it really just makes a lot of sense from a management of, manpower and resources that a town may have for a given asset or system. So the goals of an asset management program, Like I said, typically we use a 20-year planning window, just as a given, period of time. That can vary, but 20 years, seems to be a good baseline for a lot of assets, a lot of utilities. The goal here is obviously to prolong that asset life. By doing those, more intermediate steps and keeping up on things, hopefully you're going to get more life out of that asset, as well as know when you really need to consider, rehabilitating or replacing it before essentially it's too late. It'll give you an opportunity to have cost-effective decision-making. So coming out of this, the town's going to have basically an asset management database that'll rank and prioritize the needs of the town. And as things, evolve and things get fixed, that'll constantly be updated so that the town always has the most up-to-date information at their fingertips, as to what should be done over the coming planning window. And that just equates directly into the long-term financial stability. Just knowing what you're going to be paying out of pocket or what you're planning to pay for certain expenses, that makes all the difference in planning, especially with limited resources. And again, this is kind of similar, allocating time and resources effectively, kind of the same thing I'm driving home there. The second to last bullet here, providing a sustainable community developed level of service. So we'll get into levels of service in a couple slides here, but essentially the town, DPC, DES, and whoever the town planning group decides to invite, we're going to be going through a level of service workshop, and I'll define better what a level of service is. But it's essentially going to outline the goals of what we want coming out of this plan. And then finally, creating a living program. So that's kind of what I tried to touch on earlier, is that at the end of the day, DPC may leave the town of Plymouth, but the town of Plymouth is going to have this living asset management database. So the work is really just beginning for the town. It's a good start, but it's going to be something that grows and expands over the course of several years. And like I said, it's going to be constantly updated with real-time data, whether or not you have new drainage infrastructure going in town, or you just replaced or rehabilitated some aspects of the system. You're going to want to keep that up to date and reprioritize things as you go and plan your capital improvements plan. So that's asset management in a nutshell. Essentially, our process on this project, so this is kind of diving a little bit deeper into this project for the town of Plymouth. These are the high-level steps to what we're going to do. Number one, we're going to inventory the assets. Now, a lot of that's already been put together in that GIS database. We're going to have to sort through that information to see, what might be missing, what needs updating, depending on how long ago it was. So really the key is getting that huge database of every pipe segment, every manhole, every catch basin, all inventory. So we know what we're starting with. We know what we need to do. That rolls into step 2, where we then want to perform a condition assessment, whether that's physically observing conditions or whether that's using data points such as date of installation, the material of pipe, for example. Different pipes have different lifespans. So we can use those data points without actually, getting eyes on something to still rank and score and prioritize assets in a cost-effective manner. Number 3 would be determining that sustainable level of service. And again, we'll get into that to expand on what a level of service is. And then ultimately 4 and 5 is really coming up with the capital improvements program, so the town can plan these expenses, what's required and what they want to do over the next period, and then develop an implementation plan, how to get that done, whether it's grant opportunities, what other sources of funding are there, what are mechanisms that the town could explore to generate funds for the capital improvements program, how to fund it. So that's what we're hoping to leave the town with at the end of this project. So just a quick kind of overview of each of these steps. I'm going to go into numbers 1 and 2 right now, which is the inventory and then the actual evaluation of the assets. So on this project, we left it a little bit loose in terms of the scope when June, Joseph, and I put it together. And the reason for that was that we have so much data that we need to sort through that's already been done. We didn't want to, double efforts, etc. So once we sift through that, we do have an allowance for some level of field investigations. Like I mentioned, whether that's visually popping manholes and catch basins, doing culvert inspections, etc. So actually getting eyes on the infrastructure. We could be doing some closed circuit television, CCTV work, inspecting actual internals of pipes and running a camera down them. Same with culverts. And then there's some other like acoustic methods like sonar testing. That'll tell you kind of the integrity of pipes, and that's just a quicker way than the television inspection. You get more production out of that. So through a combination of field work, which DPC actually does in-house, that'll just add value to what we're doing here in terms of filling in the gaps of what data we're going to be taking from the existing GIS database. So there's going to be some level of field work involved in this project, most likely. And GPS coordinates as well. If we find things that may or may not have been GPSed as part of the initial project, then we will go back and refine that. We have those capabilities as well. So that was the first step, inventorying it, evaluating it, and then we come to score it. And this is just an example of a recent project we did. I think this was actually set up for a sewer project, but it's all the same, there's pipe, etc. So this just shows you at the end of the day, and we're going to develop what these scores are, what the criteria is with the town. So this won't be done by DPC in a vacuum. The whole point of this project is that at the end of the day, the town of Plymouth is going to be the user, the end user, who's going to carry it for years and years. So really the goal is to have as much input from the town of Plymouth and decisions made from your side of the table, so that we don't walk away and you're left with something that you don't want to use, or you're not going to end up using it. So I feel like I should just put that out there. So this will all be developed in conjunction with the planning group that we're working with, but essentially shows you for pipe, for structures, there will be different criteria, whether it's pipe type, could be a visual inspection ranking, what it's made out of, etc., the size, the criticality. And then we're going to come up with some scores, and this will help us basically resort the lines in our asset management database to show, what are the worst performing assets, or the highest needs, I should say, versus some things that, maybe it was installed a year or two ago. It's brand new pipe, you don't need to even consider, touching that for years and years. So really just a way to get a baseline and prioritize and reshuffle that database up so you have an up-to-date list. And that's something, again, that continues into the future, as conditions change. So number 3 is the level of service that we're going to come up with the town, or the town's really going to come up with this. So level of service goals are intended to be a foundation of this program. Really, it's going to require input from all stakeholders. So, not just me, not just a couple people I'm working with at town, but this is all people who, benefit or pay the price when the stormwater system, performs or does not. So it's really going to establish the expectations of those stakeholders to make sure that the program, meets those expectations and can be measured, that we're doing that. Essentially, these goals will establish timelines for implementation. I put the SMART acronym here. Everybody, I think, knows what that means by now, but specific, measurable, attainable, what's R? I always get stumped in the R. And time, you can measure it, by time. We're going to do it by this date, etc. So we're going to set, these goals. They need to be attainable, again, like I said, and it really is going to outline the commitments of the town to those stakeholders. It's going to say, well, we'll get into this. We're going to have a workshop on this, so that'll be a lot of fun. I'm sure you'll be hearing from June and Joseph on that. But essentially, it's the foundation. It's really the vision. It kind of ties together the town with its stakeholders and has everybody coming together to make sure everybody's on the same page with the vision. So our next steps here, I just laid out a few of them. So the next steps actually are to establish that level of service and the goals for that. We have a workshop tentatively scheduled for November 16th. DPC is going to work on basically refining the data that we have out of the SADIES data dump that we've acquired, and kind of see where the field investigations might have to occur. We did carry some level of that in our scope, like I said. So we'll come up with a targeted field program and run that by the town and make sure they concur that it's a good use of project funds to go and do some higher level of asset, inventory and assessment. Coming out of that, we're going to be developing, obviously, the recommendations. Where are the needs of the town? Are they all concentrated in older areas of the system? Are there undersized pipes? Culverts, rotted out, and there's no pipe left, which isn't, an odd thing. So, what are the immediate needs? What are the kind of the middle 5 to 10 year planning needs, and then what's kind of longer term, 10 to 20 years? And try to rank and prioritize those so the town has a clear picture. Along with that, we're going to have to put together, how much does this cost? What is it going to cost over the next 20 years? What should the town try to budget or look for, funding, whether it's through DES or other sources? So what are those financial strategies to actually get this done? That kind of rolls into the capital improvements plan, obviously, which is, a goal the town obviously wants to have something firm, so a capital improvements plan is a way to do that and assist with budgeting. And then we'll finalize the asset management plan, which will, it'll be a report in the way it looks, but it shouldn't be thought of, as a paperweight or something that's going to go up on your shelf. It's really going to be this living document, so I really want to drive that home. Like the last bullet says here, DPC will train the town staff basically how they can keep things up to date, hoping when we're out in the field, whether it's doing GPS or other, field investigations, we can have highway department or planning board staff, kind of tag along and get some shadowing, how we're kind of doing the things out there, and our guys can, provide recommendations for how the town of Plymouth can best keep things up to date. So your guys' work is only beginning, as I said. Take that as a warning, but I think this is a great step for the town. It's going to be a good way of doing things moving forward. So those are the next steps. So this last slide here was put together by the town of Plymouth's planning group on this project. Essentially, DES, I think it's a great idea. They kind of pushed to have a vision statement, starting out, and this presentation is intended to share that, with everybody here. I'll read it. So to develop and implement an operations and financing strategy that is stakeholder driven, I misspelled that, sorry, to ensure reliable and stable operation of the town's stormwater infrastructure in all areas of town while also meeting future capacity due to growth and climate fluctuations. So I thought that was a pretty good vision statement, all encompassing. Joseph did share, kind of additional building on to how that would be attained. I'm not going to read this, but you can feel free to read it at your leisure. I think the first one, though, is very important, that the town has realized that there's going to be an advantage partnering with the Plymouth Village Water and Sewer District. They've gone through this for their assets. They're actually now moving into higher level planning grants and actually getting some funds through DES to continue those efforts at a higher level. So they've been through, I'd say, several rounds, several years of building their database, and they're to the point where their staff has iPads and they know where assets are, whether they're buried or not. They know the conditions, they have a plan. So I think, combining that with what we're doing on stormwater makes a lot of sense. And then down the road, obviously, all of our clients, their goal is to have a whole utility and roadway solution, right? So when a road's going to be paved, you want to know the condition of everything that's buried under that road before you go and repave a nice new road just to dig it up a couple years later because a pipe broke because it was from the 1800s or something. And it happens all the time when these things aren't coordinated. So that's the end goal, is to have a full one utility, or kind of all utilities under one umbrella, or at least a way to see them and connect them all together. But I'll let you read through the rest here. But that's essentially the overview of what's going on. I know it was a lot of information and I probably went a little fast, but I'm more than happy to entertain any discussion or questions, or Joseph and June, I'm not sure how you wanted to handle this part of it, but I know, as Joseph said, DES is here as well if there's any more specific questions regarding, the grant program or the principal forgiveness program, et cetera.
Thank you very much. So are there any questions? I'll start off. I had one point of clarification. So when we're talking about stakeholders, can you provide some clarification as to exactly who we are speaking of?
Yeah, so I think June could probably speak to that because this had come up at the last meeting and we were brainstorming, who that would be. I know the college obviously in town is a large user. I would think of it as, the people that use the stormwater system or gain benefit from it. Now, I guess you could argue that's everybody, but I would tend to focus on, the businesses in the Main Street downtown area, the college, some of the larger impervious area, type people, or customers, I should say, and then also, areas that have their own on-site stormwater systems, their own private systems, whether they're kind of hybrid owned or maintained by the town or that private party. But June, you could probably expand on that. I know this came up at the last meeting.
Yeah, thanks. Well, and I was just pulling out my notes from our kickoff meeting that we had. So, yeah, I think you kind of outlined it. Obviously, there's some just, elected officials, select board, planning board members, hopefully, that, highway department, town staff. But the other kind of key, because they're, in some ways on the financial side, the budgeting, probably the budget committee, maybe the select board, that kind of thing. Some of the decision makers, so stakeholders from that sort of group. But then, as you mentioned, some of the larger areas of developed area that and certainly Plymouth State University has sort of their own stormwater network that feeds into the towns on their streets. So that's a key one. Possibly the high school, elementary school area, seeing what they have. I think we kind of need to look at the map a little bit more to see some of the bigger users. Spear Memorial Hospital. Joseph had definitely reached out to some people, invited them tonight, so I don't know exactly who's in the room there, but hopefully some representatives from maybe Plymouth State and the hospital. There's other sort of downtown areas and businesses perhaps. And then other partners might be Lakes Region Planning Commission, DOT, because our system and with having state highways in town, there's some understanding of what they have for a system and ours and how they work together in some cases, especially on Main Street. So we're still kind of, certainly everybody's welcome to participate if they have an interest. But we're looking in terms of some stakeholders, sort of decision makers, policy makers, I think, budget makers, some staff, and then some of the key stormwater generators, I guess, that feed into the town system is a good way to look at it. So.
Thank you.
Looks like we have Sharon Knoll requesting to speak as well from DES.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention another stakeholder would be the Plymouth Village Water District, Water and Sewer District. They would be a critical stakeholder as well.
Yes.
I guess we forgot to mention the obvious one.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I think, Justin, if you could go back one slide and put the vision statement up. I mean, that was definitely a piece of this meeting. Like, we sort of drafted this, but we definitely want to get some feedback on it, ideally, get some comments on that. What do people think? Is it, does it seem to capture what we need to think about? Or, we put it there as a draft, even though maybe this doesn't necessarily say it on the slide, just as a starting point, but it's not necessarily something that's set in stone yet.
I like the concepts shared at the end. I think we are going to be seeing increased loading capacity from both development and potential climate fluctuations. So I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think I recall hearing Neil express those same concerns in the past as well.
I would say a stakeholder might be where the flooding actually happens, and the landowners along the river where there's erosion. I think that.
Fishermen, swimmers, kayaks, sediment, poisons from always keeping that beautiful green glass from the area of Framingham, Mass, where I moved up here to Rumney. I'm not lucky enough to live in Plymouth, but we can't swim in the Sudbury River or eat the fish because everybody loves a beautiful green lawn. You have to really control that herbicides and sediments. Very cheaply, you can put in just a silk fence on every catch basin. And then sonic's kind of the old technology. If you go ever work on pipes in your hands and put them together, so you get in there with a GoPro, a little GC car. They have one in Campton, a racetrack there. You're probably under $1,000 and you drive it right through every system and see, are they concrete? Are they tar lines? Are they rebar? Are they chicken wire? Are they 20-inch? Are they 10-inch? You figure that out, 2 days. Save yourself a lot of dough. 30,000. I'd like to know on the brochure, what state of Mass is that picture? Where you said he has that filter system on the first page.
If I can also add, if you'd like to make a public comment, please identify yourself.
Anthony Belcher.
Thank you.
Here for a later date. Just throwing my 2 cents in, you know, if that picture on the front with the yellow coning sediment piece, what town is that in Mass? How much damage did they have? 20%, 80%, 90%? What's their recovery system? What's their population compared to ours? Did they spend 2.2 million? Did they spend 130,000? Where are we at in the high end? Where are we at in the low end? Just for starters, that's a scare tactic, you know what I mean? Because we got 30,000 delegated by the sounds of it, right?
That's, I think that was just for the assessment report.
Right, yeah. But they said they filled the Plymouth wastewater. What's that girl's name? Katie or something? I talked to them. She said she's applied a few times for some grants now.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Yes.
Frank Miller, and I would like to suggest we look at the pamphlet that was put out by Department of Environmental Service on single-family homeowner stormwater drainage mitigation, and I think what would help the citizens understand what we're doing here is to break down what constitutes solids, what constitutes nutrient loading, what constitutes chemicals in our stormwater drainage that comes off a single family lot, 1 acre lot, and how the homeowner is the beginning start of mitigating that. And there's a lot, that pamphlet that I've got from Department of Environmental Services, it was a continuation from a non-point source pollution program they had back in the 80s. But this new one is talks directly to homeowners and property owners as how they calculate the volume velocity of the water, the runoff, and then how a simple means of treating the water and at least get the people connected with the vocabulary of the subject matter which you are trying to address through a program. That's the biggest thing, because when you get down the road here another couple of years and we decide to raise and appropriate for a specific program to deal with this, if the people aren't connected with it, don't understand what you're talking about, I guarantee you you'll have a no. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Can I ask a clarification? Frank, are you referring to the New Hampshire Homeowner's Guide to Stormwater Management?
Yes.
Okay. It's a November 2019 publication that was pretty easy to find.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rebecca?
Just, I think, to clarify that we're talking about the existing stormwater infrastructure for the town right now. That is already exists, already is aging or past its useful life as well. So that's what we're talking about, assessing and determining a plan to make sure we don't lose our current stormwater processing capacity.
Yeah. Yes.
And I would just add to that, I think part of looking at the condition, and well, hopefully we'll also look a little bit at capacity, so we can have that better understanding of sort of that last part we put in the vision of, you know, future capacity, what can we handle for growth with climate fluctuations, that kind of component to it, I think is important, because if we have a lot of infrastructure that's not in good condition, adding more stormwater into it might not work. So I think that's something that the planning board in particular, is through site plan review, you know, should be considering and having this information. We don't really know much yet, so it's hard, we can't really say to somebody, you know, their connection into our system is good or bad, or is gonna cause us problems or not. I mean, we've had two projects in the last year or so that, you know, we've sort of had some questions right in our downtown area. The parking lot on Highland Street that's under construction now, and then Mid-State's change of use, but we were trying to look at what the current condition of their parking lot, and they have a lot of impervious surface. What's that condition coming into our system, which we know is not in good shape, but it's got to be repaired, but we want to make sure it all connects properly. So that growth piece is important to consider. So,
June, will you remind me, I think during one of our discussions of somebody's stormwater permit, there was a mention that runoff calculations were being revised upward, likely, you know, for the, I thought that we had discussed, you know, sizing, it was in context of the Ford dealership. They had, they had an existing culvert, and it was marginal in terms of handling a certain size storm, but I thought that the engineer that was presenting had mentioned that is it FEMA that defines flood, the magnitude of runoff and storm events. I thought that was being revised already. Does that sound familiar?
To me.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we could talk about. And I mean, I don't know if we would want to implement a more strict standard than what's commonly accepted for runoff calculations. I mean, if engineers typically go to the 50-year storm, we could consider requiring designs for a 100-year storm. You know, that's something that.
I think that'll be part of the discussion.
But that's new. Those are for new projects. That's not really related to assessment of our existing infrastructure.
well, I think the new site plan review regulations that were just adopted, and hopefully everybody's signed, that we can have better stormwater guidance, certainly in that document and that set of regulations, than our 20-year-old ones. So, which reminds me, Justin, we need to get you a copy of those.
That would be great. Yeah.
Now that they're official.
Yes, Mike.
I might also mention, you know, on our discussion, the vision statement, where it talks about town will also meeting future capacity due to growth in climate fluctuations. There's also some major changes in the town and every town. Traditional tendencies, whereas there's not the farming that's going on that there was 50, 75 years ago when everybody was in agriculture. Everybody had a garden. Everybody was turning over their lawns and their fields on a regular basis, which was this huge sponge to hold all the water when we had a rain event. And that was in the entire community of the basin, the watershed. So that's one change. The other change is because we're not turning over the land on a regular basis, especially our lower interval and the upper interval in Plymouth, where the flooding happens. Because we're not turning that over, and some of it's turned into parking lots and ball fields that's not getting dug up, there is maybe some, and I noticed it in my field, 172 acres, the ground has gotten more and more compacted because we're not turning over, we're using no-till. And when you put 12 feet of water sitting on a field that 12 feet of water is extremely heavy. Just try holding up a 55-gallon drum. That's an enormous amount of weight. And we're compacting our soil in our fields more and more so that when we do have rain, it may not be more rain, it may not be more rain in an hour, it might be just that the water has nowhere to go. So I think we need to talk about the changing land use, the changing tendencies of the citizens in the community, which is causing us to be sitting here tonight talking about what are our goals, what are the processes, what do we need to be looking at. And I think that's more than necessarily town growth. We have some towns in New Hampshire that are smaller than what they were, but we're having more issues with water and drainage than we did 75, 80 years ago when there were twice the population.
Thank you. I mean, and there are definitely changes in growth and land use that are definitely worth considering. And at the same time, on some level, what we're fundamentally talking about is taking stock of what we have and keeping that up to date, which also means potentially expanding it in some ways for what you're talking about.
We have to.
Yeah.
We definitely, if we're not going to go back, which we're not, no one is going back to 50, 75 years ago, we have to take that into account and resize some of the culverts because of what we're seeing.
So I think when we look at
I would
this
just add that something that Justin said in the beginning, which I think is a pretty simple couple facts, where 12.5 miles of storm drain pipe is approximately what Plymouth currently has. And we don't know much about that condition and the lifespan, the remaining lifespan of that system. And then in addition, we have over 1,700 structures that are similar. So this project is really geared towards better understanding of that existing system and evaluating its condition, functionality, that's kind of that level of service aspect that he mentioned. So we need to sort of better know that piece. That's kind of what's in it's basically under our roadways. So what do we have now? How is it working? What's the level of service it's providing? What should it be providing? What does it need to provide in the long term? I think is really kind of the key part of this project. Sort of stepping away from that and looking at future capacity, I think will be a sort of a next phase once we know what we have now. But our current project is more focused on that 12.5 miles of pipe and 1,700 structures.
Yep.
I think kind of to address Mike's comment a little bit, I think that when we talk about growth, we're really talking about land use change. And, you know, we could, if we're not adding the amount of impervious surface to the town's inventory of impervious surfaces, like it doesn't really, I mean, not that it doesn't matter how many people are, but the number of people don't necessarily matter in this case so much as the increase in impervious surfaces. So I'm wondering if we want to, I mean, I don't know if we want to wordsmith or we want to make any edits to this vision statement, but, well, maybe I do. Or I would just suggest that we also meet in future capacity necessary under expected land use change and climate change conditions.
And this is part of our level of service discussion as well,
Yeah.
presumably.
Yeah, so.
Phil, was there a lot of this in the capital improvement plan, or?
No, at this point, yeah, I don't think we had a basis to do this, and I think that, you know, if, you know, having the information from this would empower us to include this in the capital improvement plan for the future years. I think we took a rough crack at roads.
Yeah,
you
I
know,
remember
road
seeing a culvert on
reconstruction,
there
but,
too.
you know, that really didn't include maintenance of existing, you know, drainage infrastructure.
I mean, there's stormwater culverts and there's like stream crossing culverts too, which can be I mean, they're all infrastructure and important, but
Yep.
handle different things.
Yeah. And then a lot of them, I mean, when you think about, you know, anything along Tenny Mountain Highway or Main Street is probably DOT maintained, but, you know, it's nice to have a good eye on everything that the town is responsible for as well. All right.
Actually, just to be clarifying, right downtown, I'm not entirely certain of the limits, probably somewhere near the crossing of the Baker River on the north end, and then probably Warren Street on the south end. Everything in between there, the town is responsible for on Main Street for the stormwater. That's why we're doing the major downtown stormwater drainage project.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. But on Tenny Mountain Highway, it's different. It's more culverts. It's not catch basins and pipe, a connected system.
Right.
The same way it is downtown, So Rebecca, you offered an edit of at the end, changing it to meeting, if I wrote it down right, expected capacity due to land use change.
I said meeting future capacity necessary to under expected land use change and climate change conditions.
Meeting future, okay, I got that wrong. Future capacity necessary.
Yeah, changing growth to land use change, basically.
Basically, I'm not crazy about climate fluctuations as a word. I think that's dancing around instead of just saying climate change. I think it's not necessarily fluctuating.
Climate always changes.
So keeping the same spirit, just being a little bit more specific and direct. Okay. Any further comments or questions or anything?
This is great.
Just, are we really, we're more, it seems like it's more, talking more about downtown.
Well,
Are we gonna talk about erosion, river erosion, anything like that, or we're just not?
I think that would be a separate discussion. We're talking about the infrastructure to deal with stormwater.
Right.
And the map is what we're talking about. And, I mean, there are issues with river erosion, which I think would be a separate discussion than the one we're having tonight.
I think you could make a good case that towns upstream should be notifying us of through the developments of regional impact. You know, if they've got a project where they're, if Lincoln is planning a project with a big parking lot that's gonna increase runoff rates, you know, that has potential to affect, that's a development of regional impact. You know, if it's gonna affect downstream communities, I think that's what that RSA is.
Or it wouldn't necessarily impact this asset assessment very much.
What's that?
It would affect us, but as a town, but not necessarily this assessment of our assets.
No, it's unrelated to this.
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting, you know, Mike's concern could
Yeah.
probably be better addressed through the process of development of regional impacts and offering feedback and, you know, to other communities upstream when they're considering development.
Because when the river backs up, every system in the town is affected. And we had the governor's, a group from the state here 5 or 4 years ago when we had a huge impact on the river. And there was discussion and nothing really came of it. But that plays a huge important role in the runoff.
I don't think we're saying it doesn't. I think this is closely
Oh, no,
related.
I know. I don't think
and-
you're saying that
yeah.
either.
I mean, this is what I do for a living, is deal with stormwater. So, but what we're dealing with here is to make sure that our stormwater system has the capacity to buffer our rivers from being inundated with stormwater. So this is a piece of the puzzle.
I didn't know if we got the free money, whether we could get into that, because it seems like we don't really ever do much with it. So that's my thought, if, well, we've got the experts, and this guy was extremely knowledgeable, this, put this program together, Justin, I thought did an excellent job, and if there's the manpower to help us, maybe now's the time. And if it's not this project, something similar. That's all.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a quick question. For my edification, it may not be obvious. I'm a big believer of Guilford's Law, being able to identify the problem, get it on paper, and you're halfway there. We're talking about this infrastructure. I'm really curious. The infrastructure we're talking about, the 12.5 miles and manholes and everything, is that a town asset? Excuse my ignorance. Or is this a Plymouth Village and Water asset, or is it a combination of both? when we're talking about the physical assets. When you talk about the sewage and water, I mean, the storm drain
So-
system.
Yeah, so I can just jump in and try to answer that, Mike. It's a town-owned system, so there's really, like, if you look at a map, an engineering drawing of downtown Main Street, or, you know, our village streets, you will see under the pavement, you can map out locations of a water line, which is your, you know, the water coming into your house, that's a Plymouth Village Water and Sewer District service. Then there's a sewer line leaving the property, or business or house, that's Plymouth Village Water and Sewer. But then runoff from the road, the sidewalk, and sometimes it does come off of roofs, other impervious surfaces, parking lots, you know, that usually runs overland into catch basins and into these manholes. The diagram that he had was excellent, and then it leaves that and goes through piping systems, and eventually it makes its way out to the Pemmy River. But so there's stormwater piping and structures, and that's owned by the town of Plymouth. That is a Plymouth responsibility. So Plymouth Village Water and Sewer does water and sewer, and we do storm drainage. Traditionally, in the old days, a lot of stormwater would go into the sewer system and into the wastewater treatment plant. But since the 70s, the Clean Water Act, and trying to separate that, a lot of that has been done. Not to say there might still be places where there's some combined or roof drains that go into sewer lines, but there's really 3 separate systems: drinking water, sewer, and stormwater.
Thank you, June.
One question I have is, all those state roads that go through Plymouth, those are still all our own, every pipe is ours on those?
Sounds like just in the downtown area for the most part.
Yeah, and that's just something we're not, I don't know if Joe Fagnet, the highway manager's here, there's a little bit of lack of clarity in my mind, certainly kind of where the beginning and end of our system is. I think it has to do with what our town streets connect into systems that may be under the state highways, then may we end up owning it. I don't know for sure, and there's some old agreements between the town and the state probably about that. Traditionally, the state kind of maintains the road and the pavement. But like on Teddy Mountain Highway, which is a state highway, there are culverts that go underneath, which I believe the state is responsible for, not the town. So I think that ownership question, we do need to, that's one reason why DOT needs to be a stakeholder to help us better look at those areas of whose jurisdiction it is. But on every town street, you know, every culvert on, you know, New Eben Road, Old Eben Road, Thurlow Street, all those kinds of areas that are more culvert-based, just a pipe going across the road, that don't connect necessarily, except for maybe ditching on the side. You know, there's a lot of responsibility on the town's part for having a system that functions.
June, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you have a private driveway that crosses a roadway ditch, I think that culvert, is that one, I think those culverts are still the responsibility of the homeowner, are they not?
I believe that's true, yes.
So, you know.
Because you're using the town's right-of-way to access your property, so you're responsible for the culvert.
So that's a clarification. If a culvert goes under the road from one side to the other, that's town. But if it's, you know, under a driveway, that's you as the homeowner.
Thank you.
One other thing?
Yes, Mike.
One thing I've noticed, when we do have a rain event, I see how Plymouth's Main Street is just inundated with water, where there's sometimes 3-4 inches of water along the sidewalk in the road. And I just think, man, there's no way that the town system is even coming close to taking care of that. And my thought is, back years ago, in the watershed that came right into the town of Plymouth, there were probably many structures in place that withheld the water and let it come back in days, if not weeks, before it landed on Main Street in Plymouth. And I don't know if there's ways that this plan can remake those in some cases.
Well, I think some of that is being addressed separately in the other project that's going on. The downtown
The
stormwater project.
Re-engineering. I mean, there's
South
significant
Main
re-engineering
and
Main
Russell
Street.
Street and.
And I'm thinking also in the rural areas before it gets down into Main Street. Back years ago, before we had widespread electricity, people had ponds everywhere holding the water back so that they could then make electricity. And I'm just thinking there's got to be ways to hold that water back, because in the rain events now, it is all coming onto Main Street. We had the same rain events, the same amount of rain. It's
More rain, more intense storms that are happening, well documented.
we can disagree on that, but there is more water coming onto Main Street because it's not being withheld in different spots.
Which is in some ways a separate issue having to do with our land use laws and regulations and
The amount of impervious surface. that
impervious
exists.
surfaces and,
I mean, I look at what Market Basket did and a few other businesses on Tenny Mountain Highway, and they actually had those structures that we saw, those yellow pipes under their parking lot to withhold the
Infiltration
water
basins.
and to then release the water on a much slower basis. And that was extremely smart that there's those processes.
and I would say
Easy.
that's important and.
And
I-
required.
And required, and it's something we take care of through state law and our site plan review regulations and other places. And it's a little bit outside the scope of what we're talking about for this program we're talking about this evening. It all connects on some level,
Yeah.
but you have to draw the lines somewhere.
Yeah. We're just a really unique town in New Hampshire because of the flooding situation. We can make much bigger pipes, get all the water to the river quicker, and then we're just making the problem worse.
Every town upstream that does that makes the problem worse here too.
I would say we don't want to get the water
That's-
to the river faster, we want to get the water in the ground faster.
Exactly.
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 But that's outside of the discussion of our stormwater asset management program.
You know,
I think.
if you look at any of the site plans that we've done lately, you know, look at Aroma Joe's, it was a flat parcel, and when they developed it, they created a detention basin that all their storm drains flow into the detention basin to allow it to infiltrate on site instead of running off. You
And we
know,
strike-
that's typical of almost any new project we've done is, you know, they're required to treat additional runoff on site so that no additional runoff is exiting the site under storm calculations.
And that's been further emphasized in our new site plan review regulations.
Yeah. I mean, as a board, we don't have a whole lot of, I mean, unless we want to propose requiring BMPs for residential landowners in the zoning ordinance, like, this board doesn't have a lot of authority to dictate what happens unless there's a site plan or subdivision happening.
So we're getting a little off topic at this
Right,
point,
I know, I
and we
agree,
should
I
probably
agree.
pull it back
I'm
and
good.
ask if there's any questions specifically left about the asset management program. Not the broader implications that can get pretty big and sprawling. Okay, well, thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation and very informative, and I'm sure there'll be more discussions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, switching gears a bit, communications received by the board. Unless there's any last comments from staff before we move on? Beth? No? Okay. Communications received by the board?
Yeah, we did get one communication. We received an email update from Mount Village Charter School stating that they have removed some stumps at the site. We, the staff, but are still working on the design of buildings and other issues, and we'll be following up with them about, you know, the next steps under this. But
Okay.
that was there.
She'll presumably come before the board at some point. Any other communications? Is that it?
I believe that's all we have.
Okay. Are there any committee reports?
None.
None? All right.
CIP committee has not met since our last meeting.
All right then, so off to new business. First up is a continuation of our zoning amendment discussion of 7791 and 915. And we all have a handout here, which lists 6 different amendments. And the ones in bold, I think we've pretty much squared away. I'm not sure the language yet, but at least, well, not the language yet, but at least the main points we want to kind of hash out as a board. The ones left not bolded, there are still some outstanding questions we're trying to clarify. So that includes basically setbacks, both in the village commercial and in the residential areas. And so we can begin with the village commercial setbacks. And it seems like there's a pretty good consensus from our last discussion that we probably want to establish a maximum setback of 10. And it seemed that our biggest discussion was whether to change to a 0 or a 5-foot minimum setback. I've got some of my own thoughts about that, but curious if there's any other thoughts. And at our last meeting, we also at the very end received some printouts to help us think about some of these issues and walk around and see what it might look like. You could also see the rest of Main Street and where we kind of vary between 0 and what is it, 5 or 8 feet, maybe even 10 feet in places. And are there any thoughts? Are we still up for 10 maximum? And if so, what would the minimum? I mean, I think we're down to 0 or 5 probably. My personal thought was to go for 0, and if nobody uses it, that's okay. Everybody's still within compliance. And if anybody has a reason to use 0, that they can, it gives them more flexibility.
Yeah, I like that
I'm fine with
logic.
that.
I mean, yeah. There's really not much reason for more of a setback in that area in reality, unless someone chooses to, and this gives them the option. You know, it gives them the range of 0 to 10.
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly, I think it's more flexible than 5 to 10.
Yeah.
So I would support that.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Sounds good. And then there were the single-family and multifamily residential setbacks, which are currently at 30, which works in some parts, but in many parts, especially the more historic districts, is completely out of, it basically puts most of those areas out of conformity with our current zoning. And so we had talked about potentially doing a 15-foot minimum everywhere, which would allow people to come closer where appropriate at the front setback. And if you wanted to stick with the 30, you could stick with the 30, or at a minimum, of course, or go more if you have the land for it. But it means anybody wanting to build where there are between like 10, 12, 15, 20-foot setbacks currently, you could do that without having to go through any arduous process.
Yeah, I agree. If we change from 30 to 15, it makes a lot of existing structures that are currently non-conforming. It makes them conforming so that modifying them becomes a much simpler process.
So remind me what this is pretty much for any new construction in the single family and multifamily residential.
Any current
changes to
construction is
existing
already,
structures.
yeah.
Okay, or changes to existing structures.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because we did have the non-conforming, and I'm just trying to remember what we did for in the non-conformity section
With
of
with the diagram of the building?
No,
Oh,
no, with houses that get taken down and.
So houses that are destroyed either by fire or purposefully are allowed to use, I think it's for a limited amount of time, 1 year, their current footprint to rebuild.
Is that what it was? I thought
But
we were.
if they have to be permitted new after 366 days, they have to meet setbacks.
Yes.
So if you're, if you look at the house that burned down on Parker Street
Right.
that's been gone for a while, that would have to meet a 30-foot setback.
Yeah.
Whereas if they'd rebuilt it within a year of the fire, it would have been on its current footprint, which is probably 15 or 20 feet.
Yeah.
And, my thinking is,
So this gives people more flexibility to
I don't see any timeline.
fit into the, is there no time?
Non-conforming structure which has been destroyed partly or completely may be rebuilt with the following limitations. Non-conforming area of rebuilt structure shall not exceed the dimensional size of the original building footprint. They shall be repositioned to the greatest extent possible in conformance with the, okay. This is not intended to prohibit the property owner from using a foundation after destruction or demolition or permitting a new foundation to be built in the same location of the demolished foundation.
So this,
no time
this,
limit?
No time limit.
Okay. all right.
this would give a little bit more flexibility though.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't see necessarily any adverse impacts.
Yeah, and-
Except changing the character of some of the single-family residential that's really on the outskirts of the zone, thinking particularly up in, like up Thurlow Street and things like that. And I'm not necessarily for or against that, I just think careful consideration needs to be taken, that all of a sudden if there's, up on Chattering Lane, there's a whole bunch of home sites that haven't been developed, and, that could change the character of those neighborhoods.
And I guess the question would be, would that be a hardship to abutting properties, or is that okay?
And I guess I'm just bringing it up because that's how it would be if that's the case.
It
So
might be really appreciated, especially some of the properties on Ski Lift Lane drop off really fast. So 15-foot setback reduces the amount of fill they have to bring in, reduces the amount of construction they have to do down slope. I don't. And if they want a 30-foot setback or a 40-foot setback, they can still do that. 15 is
They'll
just
pay up for
the
it.
minimum.
Yeah, they'll
Right.
definitely pay up for it because it's
Right.
steep there. Yeah.
I really like the closeness of the neighborhoods that have homes that are set back 15 or 20 feet feel more pedestrian friendly. They feel more welcome. I think that's something we should be encouraging.
In fact,
or allowing at least.
It's good evidence that they're also sometimes safer with more eyes in the street and other things as well, which is not a huge problem in Plymouth necessarily, but.
And like you said, a lot of those lots up there are very steep on one side or the other, and
Both sides.
yeah, sometimes you just can't.
Ski runs.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just can't.
Ski lift lane. I'd like to go to 15 in the single family and multifamily.
I would agree.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought on that? So I guess that's pretty much all of our
Outstanding.
zoning questions, and I guess we can start working on language and tweaking the finer points.
Yeah, we as staff, we can start, now that we sort of have a sense where the board wants to go, we'll start putting together some draft language that, we can come to the board with at a later date, then can get that process started once we can look at the timeline calendar for the zoning amendments for the, upcoming year, and we can start getting some draft language hammered out that we can share with the board based on, what you all have agreed upon.
All right, well, thank you. Look forward to that. So next up is downtown vision and planning discussion, land use and community issues, garbage can removal. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of my own introduction here. So I think part of this is sparked by the select board's removal of the trash cans downtown, which for me led to several other questions about our kind of broader vision of downtown and how that fits in or doesn't fit in, perhaps reflected in our master plan as a vision for downtown. And so we have our master plan, which is guided by a pretty rigorous process of public outreach and input. And so I turned back to our master plan to see what it said and how this might guide us. I mean, just to kind of step back for a moment, I think there's been a lot of focus on the downtown area lately, and I think for some people that the trash cans have kind of sparked an even closer focus on this, the removal of the trash cans. But there's also the beautification committee that's been doing a lot of work downtown, and a lot of really impressive work downtown, and putting a lot of effort in. And there's the planning board thinking about some of the downtown issues, taking downtown walks, and thinking about some of the zoning issues, and perhaps getting further into them as we go through a housing study. And so I think there's been a lot of focus. And I think just that question of the garbage cans for some of us kind of like focused us even further on some of these questions. Like, so looking at the master plan, like right up front on one of the first pages, so, we want a walkable downtown with locally owned downtown businesses. The question is, how do we achieve this, right? It should be inviting, convenient downtown, pedestrian focused, hassle-free. Things like, parking always comes up. There's aesthetics, right? Like, is it pleasing to look at and a nice place to be? And lots of other issues. And so I was, looking further into the master plan, just to quote the master plan a little bit here. The downtown area has suitable terrain for high-intensity residential and commercial use and is already used in such a way. Skipping a sentence. In order to make the most of the land in the downtown area, the planning board should consider developing a downtown master plan. There's another section on tasks and strategies, and related issues on another page a bit further into our master plan about sidewalks and complete streets and other issues like that. And on the one hand, I was struck reading all this by saying, like, this is a pretty big call, like, for a downtown master plan, which is an interesting idea. And at the same time, I was struck by, given that there's not, given the importance of downtown to our identity and to so much of what happens in Plymouth, there's not a whole lot of specific language, except that we should have some more specific language, perhaps in a downtown master plan. So this is, all got me thinking about all these different stakeholders at this point: the beautification committee, and decision makers, and the planning board, and of course the community and the select board. And do we need some more coordination in thinking about some of these questions and all the work that these different individuals and decisions these different individuals and committees and boards are making? So for me, I guess my two questions I have are, to address the specific issue of the garbage cans, which I know is slated to be looked at on a regular basis by the select board, to deem whether or not it was a good question. What should the criteria be? And is the volume of litter on the streets a sufficient metric to gauge that? Whether they're a benefit to downtown and the walkability of downtown and the survival of this really interesting, vibrant part of town. And the other part of the question is, our master plan calls for the development of a downtown master plan. Do we want to go that far? Or do we at least want to kind of outline in a more limited way some kind of vision that can tie our conversations together that we're having on these different boards and committees, and coordinate our actions a bit better? So that's kind of where I'm at. And I've got some other notes here and stuff, but so do we want to address the trash can issue as a planning board interested in land use issues and the vibrancy of downtown? Or is that going to be strictly, do we want to provide any guidance to the select board in that regard? Not to question or support their decision, just to say, like, what should the criteria be from a kind of planning board land use perspective? And then more broadly, what do we want to do about that master plan call for a bigger vision for downtown? Which we're not obviously going to solve all tonight.
One thing I've noticed, John,
Yes.
is a lot of the business owners downtown may not live in Plymouth.
Okay.
So they do feel like they don't have as much of a voice. And maybe some sort of document with them having more input.
Mm-hmm.
Might not be a bad idea, maybe not a master plan, but maybe just more of their input in the existing master plan we have, in a section or something.
Is there not already a kind of a downtown business committee? Wasn't
It's
Marianne
parking
Barnsley-
committee.
Is it parking focused exclusively?
And they used to have in the past Main Street committees.
Yeah.
And The chamber was more geared towards that before it became the Central New Hampshire. And right now, there's really nothing tying them together except for the parking committee.
I will say, and not that, so in the development of the master plan, surveys were sent out to all registered voters and all property owners. So it wasn't just people who are residents of Plymouth that were asked to provide feedback
Just
for
the
this. So,
property
yeah,
owners
so,
too.
yeah. So, I mean, that's not gonna cover all businesses, but that will cover some of them.
So I do just want to point out, we do have someone, raising their hand on Zoom. So I don't know if you want to establish how you want to, at what point it will be appropriate to get public input.
Well, let's hear if there's anybody on the planning board for a few minutes first, and then kind of we'll open it up a bit.
I would, may I say a couple
Yeah.
things? I would caution us opening up a public discussion about trash cans here at the planning board, because I think we don't have the
The authority.
authority to determine the future of the trash cans. I think what we can do as a board is look at the master plan. I don't really want to be in a position where we're telling the select board to do what to do, but maybe point out that we think that, a welcoming, vibrant downtown is what's called for in the master plan, is something that we determined through the master plan.
I guess my question was, like, I don't want to tell them what to do, but I was just wondering, like, how do we measure a vibrant downtown? And are these public services we offer important to those businesses downtown and to our vision as defined in the master plan? We get a lot of feedback on, as you say. And can we offer any guidance, not on whether or not to bring them back, but on what sort of things, from a land use perspective, we think are worth looking at in making that kind of decision? Besides, like, how much litter piles up. And I think there's a broader kind of quality of life sort of question for this very profitable and identifying part of our town that
I think
are important.
Getting back to Mike's comment earlier, we don't have a clearly defined problem, and I think until we do, I'm not sure it makes a whole lot of sense to convene a Main Street Master Plan committee. I mean, there are some common topics or concerns, and I think there are organizations of business people who will bring their concerns to the town.
Yeah.
Based on my understanding, I've heard a few that have raised concerns, and I think when it comes to trash cans, it's it's an inconvenience. Honestly, I didn't realize they were missing, but I've been out of town more often than not lately. I would think that it would shift a burden to the business owners. They're going to be seeing more, people carrying more trash into their stores, and I would think it would be an inconvenience for them more than anything. But that being said, I certainly do not want to weigh into this discussion of what I think the selectmen should be dealing with.
No, I respect that.
And I think that process needs to happen. As the business owners start to get more trash, then they're gonna go back to the selectmen and say, hey. So I think that process almost needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And if they need something, I'm sure they'll reach out.
Okay.
And then we can go from there.
Yeah.
But like you said, I just don't think the trash cans is where we wanna go.
No, like, and part of it for me was, like, for me, it opened up some bigger questions about division and about, if you listen to some of the select board discussions, a lot of questions came up, well, who's even responsible for these issues? And the planning board's not gonna answer that. But for me, it just raised concerns about, like, we have Parks and Rec, we have the Highway Department, we have the various boards, and they all seem to have a hand in here. And it sounds a little sometimes like, I wonder if the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. And we're not going to solve that as a planning board, obviously. But I was just wondering about reading the master plan. It seems for a very important part of town that some of these questions were not as defined as they could be. Or some of the concerns that you got feedback on were not as defined as they could be. And it seemed to be pushed into the possibility of having another document or another study that led into a broader vision for our downtown. And it just seems that there's a lot of people, including this board, looking into what that vision might be. And I'm just wondering what that coordination might look like.
Sounds like a great question to take to the public interviews for the town administrator position the next month.
Yeah, that would be a really
Gonna
good
handle it.
question. That's a big one. Because like you said, there's a lot of components that make this town go.
Yeah.
And the communication may not be good, or it may be good, I don't know. But, you're right, there's a lot of pieces to that.
I don't think we're a big one though. It seems like we have some public here. I think we
Okay.
should open the floor to the public if the, if.
I just wanted to see if there's any,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the one, yeah, I mean, I think some of these are land use issues
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
land use vision issues, which is where I do think we potentially have a voice. Obviously, in the administration and appropriation of funds and all that, we don't. But, yeah, so other voices on, was there a hand up on Zoom?
No longer.
Are there any voices? Yes, if you'd like to identify yourself and take a few moments.
Thank you, John. Joyce Weston, representative for Plymouth, and also chair of the Plymouth Beautification Committee, which grew out of our desire to restore the roundabout, and that expanded to the gardens around the roundabout. And since then, we had a meeting just last week about our vision for the future. We're in an interesting position because the people who are dedicated to this particular little subcommittee are really gardeners, and we want to beautify the downtown and help restore the gardens that are really neglected. But we do not want to become maintenance for either PSU or Parks and Rec. And I think there's a certain tension there between what Parks and Rec thinks that we can do, and also PSU, they have totally neglected everything recently. So we feel we're pushing back a little bit against that. We did do a walk downtown and looked at the state of the sidewalks and the trees and the base of the trees in downtown, and think they really could use some help. But I'm not sure that our committee wants to take that on. It's more infrastructure, and I recognize from our gardeners that they are really not interested in the infrastructure as much as they are in improving the gardens. Just to let you know where we're coming from. So we are taking on a project next year, which is the 3 little triangles on Island Street. You know, we're not going to take away the grass around those triangles. Unfortunately, Park and Rec really should continue to mow those. I'm getting into the weeds here. So I just wanted you to know, I mean, we are really interested in doing what we can to beautify the town, but we're not going to take over infrastructure issues. That being said, as somebody who actually designed the book called Complete Streets for Island Press, I know that issue really well, and I would personally love to see the town enlarge the sidewalk along Main Street on the east side, so that the trees can have more room to absorb the water, so that they could be healthier, and that people could enjoy that sidewalk more. If we put the cars, if we did parallel parking instead of the diagonal kind of parking, we would have more room for the people to be able to have benches and outdoor seating and everything on the sidewalk. And I think that would improve the livability of downtown. We also talked about opening up the gazebo, doing some plantings around the gazebo, and making that a place that people could really enjoy. If there's a problem with vandalism, we could put a camera in there, so you could, with a sign saying you're under surveillance. But we have some ideas, and I know you're the planning board. Maybe this isn't your what you're concerned about, but I just want you to know what our limitations are, And I think we need to coordinate with you and work with you, but just wanted you to know where we stand. Okay?
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce.
Actually, I think Frank's walking up. Oh.
Ladies before gentlemen, we're all sure. Still exists.
Well, I'll make this brief. I think originally this conversation was struck because we did notice people who are on Main Street walking did notice the lack of trash receptacles. I noticed, I was walking my dog went to the restroom outside. We went to grab a bag and realized there were no trash receptacles to put that waste into. So that started this conversation. I went to the decision makers, the individuals, the select board who proposed this new policy of a carry in, carry out method, basing this decision off of towns like Lincoln, for example. Lincoln, while it's beautiful, and I know that they are improving the walkability of their main street, it's a very different setup and design. Littleton was another example. However, I contacted Littleton. They do have trash receptacles evenly spaced along their main street, and their highway department does support the transfer station and delivers that trash over. And then this whole idea of the master plan came up, and I think this does align with the mission of the planning board. It's a little different than what you guys may typically work on, but talking about asset management tonight, this is a form of preventative care of the Main Street area, which is so vibrant now. And currently, if you do take a walk on Main Street, you will see increased trash outside of local businesses. Some of these businesses aren't prepared for their space. We're not talking about restaurants. We're talking about quaint boutiques. We're talking about a deli, a coffee shop. We're not talking about a restaurant like you can go into, Lincoln to get a bagel and eat there, and maybe not every, what I'm trying to say is not every entity on Main Street is like that or has that ability. The quality of Main Street, I think, is something that may suffer from the lack of trash receptacles. We're talking about dog feces, drug paraphernalia. I have seen needles before in Plymouth, unfortunately. Hate to say it, but condoms, you will see. Some of your responses were saying that we should put this pressure back onto local businesses. However, I don't think we're really focusing on the fact that we have a college here, and the trash comes during the night when businesses are closed. So I think as part of a planning board, select board, unfortunately no one is here representing them tonight, but also as leaders in the community, we have to lead with an approach where we are looking at all solutions, and that's what I have brought today. I did do some research. I did contact other towns to see what they were doing, but I did want to provide some suggestions that I hope that this planning board will take into consideration when looking at the master plan and why it was developed with the support of voices from our community, okay? When approaching other stakeholders in this community, such as the Board of Selectmen, all right? One of them is a solution. I'll go over the first one. I have a few. Is in Canada, love Canada. They had a study within the past few years. There was a town there that decided they wanted to eliminate trash receptacles. Over a course of a few years, they realized that was not a good solution to a problem. So during the study, they found that people are prone to litter every 25 feet. So that was why they recommended to have trash receptacles evenly spaced every 25 feet. Currently, I think one of the problems that was stressed by the select board, some select board members, I should say, is that trash cans are overflowing. One of the reasons why they are overflowing is because we have so few of them, which makes it difficult for other departments to manage when they're filling up so frequently. Another idea, which again goes hand in hand with the ecotourism destination that we are in Plymouth, is that we add recycle retainers out there for recycled goods. I looked up what ecotourism is. It means traveling responsibly. I do think that our master plan part of that approaches the idea of who do we want to come into town? How do we want them to engage in our community? And I think that is something that we could add along with the increase in trash cans, excuse me. Another idea is that we could add colorful signage on barrels and along Main Street to reinforce the town's expectations and encourage people to put their trash or recyclables where they belong. The town could also invest in trash cans that can be bolted to the ground or hung from light poles or posts, preventing them from being tipped over, because I know that has been an issue in the past from the college community. And then also looking at adequate staffing of our departments. You know, it's possible that maybe we don't have the staffing to manage this problem throughout the year. So maybe we make this a seasonal suggestion where during the warmer months we have trash receptacles and recycling outside, but then during the winter months we don't. And then also an idea is could be more affordable, looking at benefits and all of that, to just look at maybe investing and supporting in a local business. There are more and more popping up people doing trash removal. So again, I think we're just coming to local leaders and as another stakeholder in this community to make, maybe an effort or to suggest some new solutions to the Board of Selectmen, because I'm not sure that any of these suggestions have ever been implemented, as someone who does frequently visit downtown.
Thank you, Josie.
You're welcome.
I do have some comments, but I think I'm going to hold off until after Frank and anyone else speaks.
I'm Frank again. My program is all in the name of Plymouth, and I have an office upstairs at Chase Street. And my purpose of my business is the infrastructure of both our Main Street and Tenny Mountain Highway Business District. So I do have a lot of material. I have a map of Main Street from 1900, and you'd be happy to know that the Weeks Act of 1910 was a result of the stormwater quality of the Pemmy River that finally got its way down to to the mills in Manchester and clogged up their intake pipes, and that's what the Weeks Act was all about. It cut off any more timbering in the White Mountain National Forest. But the biggest issue we have here on our Main Street, the Village Commercial Zone, is it's out of date, out of code, and incomplete. Our Main Street was built, it wasn't measured, it wasn't surveyed or laid out, it was just placed in, and before any code systems came in. The first code come in the United States was the National Electrical Code of 1897. Fire codes came in 1914. Water sanitation was 820, and road codes started in 1925. Needless to say, we were here. So now we're trying to update and bring into compliance our Main Street through code systems that are current. Well, what I've been collecting is a lot of materials from the last 42 years. And I was a member of the Planning Board Master Plan Committee, and I am currently I've got a map being generated of the Village Commercial Zone, large enough so that people can look at it to talk about a specified project. First underground, which would be stormwater drainage, water, sewer, then ground level, which is streets, ways, sidewalks, and parking lots. And then above grounds would be your electrical, telephone, and lighting. Those three systems we need to deal with individually. And then, of course, is our business structure. Now, I've inventoried, when I did the parking inventory and made maps of our parking system that include the downtown area, that the police department has a copy, downstairs has a copy, and the university has the same copy. So we are all dealing with the same parameters of discussion. That is one thing we haven't had, and that's what I've been working on to generate the unifying information of the historical, what we got, the way we have it, and then to have a means of discussion about how we do generate a downtown master plan, because it is the one area that there's not one landowner in the village commercial zone. That includes the federal government, the municipal government, any private landowner that has enough land to mitigate all of the land use issues on their property. It is a we, us, and ours problem. You can't deal with any one issue. Parking, you think that's so simple, but no, there's so many buildings here that are brick to brick, and there's no way they're ever going to do on-site parking. So now we have that need for a master plan specifically because of the issues. I do have a lot of that stuff, and I invite any of the interested parties. I'm over at Chase Street. Then you can come upstairs, take a look at it. I'm trying to get it out of the books and onto pictures, drawing boards, so that we can work with it.
Thank you, Frank. So I just wanted to clarify a bit here. As a planning board, we don't really have the power to make decisions about staffing and the appropriation of funds for garbage removal and garbage cans and all that sort of stuff. What we do have the ability to do, and maybe we don't feel the need to or ability to at this point, just wondering, is provide a broader vision for land use development and how other things fit into land use development in particular areas, including the downtown village commercial area, and provide a vision that can help inform some of these other decisions that are made by lots of other groups in town. And I guess that's the kind of question I was really seeking to ask today, if we're interested in helping to provide that vision that can help inform some of these other decisions that are made. And I was in part sparked by this because I saw it, like the call for the downtown master plan in our 2018 master plan. And maybe we're not quite ready for that at this point, I'm not sure, but that was kind of my bigger question. Yes?
Hello, my name's Anthony Belcher. Don't live in town, live in the great town of Rumney. There's no regulation there. You can build a skyscraper. Being an outsider, I just have to say, number one, you have the best town around. By far the best town around. There is a little bit of trash coming off exit 26, McDonald's and Bud Light cans. I pick it up. I own a trash business. I bought it from Andy Kimball over here, and I go to Hooks Holderness and pay $250 there. I tried to pay the town here for trash dumping, but they wouldn't let me, go figure. So I made friends with the Asian boy up there and Jim and Gary and everybody else, and I go to Whippoorwill and they have trash. So if you need somebody to pick up your trash and you want trash cans, I will provide them, and I will put bags in them. I'll pick them up for free, even with doggy.
Well, we're not going to be making that decision here.
No, I know that. I'm just telling you, I'm lobbing it out there. There are 4 cans in the area at the where the grass is worn at the gazebo. And the gazebo, anything you do to that would be great, and I would love to join your class. I'm not too happy with the chip. It's kind of plain Jane on the rotary over there. Back in Worcester, Mass, and in Framingham, they let us put wine kegs, and they'd say, Anthony Belcher and Sons trash removal, and we could put a little placard there, and we could keep it up, and it was done for free. You do have 4 trash cans in the park. They are quite full at July 4th, but they're not full right now. I walked through the park at 6 o'clock waiting for the 6:30 meeting. I was curious what to do with my banana split from that little ice cream store next to Bitterman's too. So with that being said, you have a great, great town. There's no trash here. I haven't seen a needle in a year. I used to pick them up at my kids' private Catholic school in Framingham, Mass, daily. So I even was the first one to go down to that park down there where the bear
I don't know if you've seen the local bear. I got a picture of him from Kevin LaPointe's across the river last week by the courthouse. He's going into the dumpsters daily. So if we could put some straps on that or something, it's great to see a bear in town. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, so I guess my question for the board is this something we want to explore? Trying to define a vision for downtown. Is this something we want to think about as we potentially do a housing study along with that, which is probably going to provide a lot of data as well? That's the question.
I mean, I think what this will take is it's not just us coming up with a vision, it takes a lot of public input.
It does.
And so I guess I'm worried about capacity.
Yeah.
And who's going to do that, and how are we going to make sure
Yeah.
we can connect with as many people as possible? I think it's a great idea. I just don't think that it's. I don't know how feasible it is for us as a board or for staff right now.
Even if it's a subcommittee, could we form a subcommittee to investigate a Main Street master plan? You know, if there's one member of this board who would be willing to chair it, and we could get volunteers from Main Street community. I mean, from the beautification committee. Is there any?
That is an interesting question. I also wonder. I know that data's out of date. You collected data for the 2018 master plan, which would have to be updated, of course.
I mean, it's 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It's not.
Too out of date.
Yeah. There's a whole second volume of the master plan, the data book, that was updated by a Plymouth State class. So.
It looks like June has a.
June?
Trying not to interrupt and use the raise hand feature.
Thank you.
I think, Rebecca, you know, one thing that maybe under communications that we should have mentioned, that Joseph and I should have mentioned, that Joseph did submit the Housing Opportunity Program grant application end of last week, and the committee that reviews those looks at them every Tuesday apparently. So we got an email, I think it was on Wednesday, right, Joseph, where so far it looks like it has a very favorable review. They did have a question about our timeline, so we did some revisions to that and sent it in. So we are anticipating that they will do another review. This was a pretty fast turnaround for a grant application. So I'm bringing that up because I think some of what you're talking about could be considered as longer term, like thinking about sort of the downtown in the context of land use as we get into that program if we're awarded the grant. So I guess my point is, well, we might find out pretty quickly about the grant application. I think the discussion we're having is really good, but maybe it's time to just think about it a little bit rather than really coming up with an answer tonight. And then we might have by the next planning board meeting more information about the HOP program, the housing program. And if that takes off, capacity is definitely something that Joseph and I were just talking about, I think, yesterday. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it'd be good to just think about this in the context of what other things we may have already kind of committed to between the stormwater asset management, if the housing program grant comes through, and we should find out about that pretty quick.
Yeah, no, I very much intended this in a kind of exploratory sort of mindset. Mike?
I like what you're talking about, John, and I think June saying, you know, looking at it as long-term, not something we want to put a plan together in a couple of years, but I think it's kind of nice to gauge the temperature of downtown more, and I'm assuming that this grant that we're looking to get to study the downtown.
Well, it's primarily housing, but in a broader context.
And I think it would be probably advantageous to maybe in parallel tracks to talk to the business owners and see if they're willing to either come to a subcommittee meeting or to the full planning board. And if that's our job, I would love to be able to have them, whether they're town residents or not, and talk about the village commercial and see what their concerns are, what their interests are, and we can use their information and a couple of information fact-finding to then be able to present to the housing study as well.
Josie?
I did forget to add one thing to my speech earlier, but maybe moving forward, right now, like you remove trash cans, that's a simple action. Now look at where we are. This could take months, years, who knows, before we get trash cans, and we don't know what it's going to look like in the meantime. Maybe what a future is moving forward is people who are making decisions, rather than making decisions quickly, they involve other people in these decisions, such as the planning board, as you guys were key official actors in creating and devising a master plan that does affect all in the community. And I think maybe that's something we can encourage in the future, is working together to find good solutions.
John, I think it's important that you're bringing this up to me. Downtown is by far the most important part of this town and community, and making sure it's beautiful and well maintained is a super important thing. Shout out to putting in the plants on the roundabout. It's a nice addition. It was nothing there for a very long time, and redoing those gardens. I mean, it would be amazing if more business owners downtown had planters and things like that to beautify downtown. We have a nice downtown, but it could certainly be taken to a next level. So I think it's important. I personally would be happy to, there's got to be plenty of examples around the country of master plans downtown in small communities. My hometown in northwestern corner of Vermont recently has completely redone their downtown, and it looks way better than it did when I was a kid. And it was some simple things, sidewalking, adding planters at crosswalks. It looks so much better than it did before. So I think it's important. I'd be happy just to do a little digging on the side and seeing what I can find for you, John.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments? So we'll, yeah. Rebecca, you raised a very valid point about the amount of time this would take.
Well, yeah.
And at the same time, like, there do seem to be a lot of hands, and I would like to see more coordination somehow, and it might not be a master plan, but somehow having everybody talk to one another a bit more.
I don't want to be a capacity to be the thing that stops us, but I do think that, you know, we all are volunteers up here. We have limited staff that can support us, and to really do a good job to get feedback. It's not just something that we say, hey, come to a meeting. It takes a facilitator to capture that feedback. I think being deliberate, meetings, more time, and then trying to take action steps beyond that. I feel like we've got our job ahead of us with the master plan that we're implementing now. I mean, the entire town does, but I mean,
I wonder if a way to think about this is we could start in some time a kind of subcommittee to start like thinking about these issues and coordinating a bit more, and maybe with the end goal for our next master plan of actually having a separate downtown master plan.
Or some more in-depth.
Or more in-depth
recommendations for that zone in particular.
For that zone in particular, in one master plan. Some towns break out separate master plans for certain important issues, and some don't.
And some update chapter by chapter.
We could work on an update to the chapter that deals with the Village Commercial District.
Yep. So there is no chapter.
There is no chapter. It's spread a little bit here and there.
Well, we could update.
Yeah, we could make some recommendations. We could add a downtown district recommendation section. I think that would fit really well within it if that's what we wanted to do. But I think
So it might warrant a little bit more discussion.
Yeah. I guess I'm not going to be chairing the committee. So
fair enough. Okay. So we have up next a conceptual consultation with Anthony Belcher. And if you just want to briefly introduce yourself and say a few words about why you're here, and then we'll try to give you some feedback about the process and what might be the next steps forward.
Thanks. Again, Anthony Belcher. Looking at renting the property where Bobby Clay and Sons was. If you don't know where that is, it's on Tinny Mountain Highway next to the Sisters. I linked out a drawing for that. And the sisters are here with their parking and the artist next door. You can share this with
Sure.
Susan. Thank you. 10,009, I only got 8.
You're good.
But
We'll share.
she's definitely getting
I'll share.
it, 'cause she's got the inquisitive eyes.
I'll share.
And I'm thinking this initial like introduction will be a few minutes, and then we can kind of have some, yeah.
So, I just didn't know, it's 0.96 acres on a major highway across from Restore. Didn't know if you could think of something you'd like to see in Plymouth there. In a perfect world, if I had $1 million, I would put Alpine there and buy 250 acres in Groton, then bring you for the zip line up there and horseback riding and snowmobiling, but I don't have that dough yet, so I probably won't have that dough for a while. Bobby Clay was there selling hot mix of sand and dirt. It was kind of an eyesore for the year for me driving by every day. Going by, we cleaned it up substantially. There's a little bit of stormwater below. It's set below their septic, which is to the right where they sell the flowers on top of the pallets. Brent next door at Granite Glass is building that new building, Granite Glass. It's going to be an office building with an apartment up above. You probably already know that from planning board. And then to the left, George's got bought out by the guy from Rapid. And then, I have to notify all the abutters. I spoke with Joe Perez, excellent guy. I don't know who hired him. You should get a attaboy on your back.
June hired him.
June is genius, genius. So I was helping him. I kind of got the old slap from Mr. Wheaton that you can't sell RVs there. And every RV I ever bought had, including my 1972 Dodge Diplomat Executive 2 that I just sold in Carroll, New Hampshire, had a bathroom, had a shower, had a stove, had a propane tank, had a heater, had a vent, had a gray water area. So I was hoping that you guys would see something that you could envision there. Igloos, Susan, over some vodka on the rocks. You know, horses, I was thinking, because the veterinarian's there, and there's that beautiful Shaker Village, and the kids play lacrosse down below there. And then you got that huge open field, but I haven't really figured out who owns that yet.
The vet.
Right,
Okay.
you know, whatever you think would be worthy there. It seems to be I only fall under the class 1 or 2 or 3, if that is even the label for the used car license versus RVing. Riverfront is sold out. Indian couple bought that for 1.2. The owner's living next to that garage on the riverside, and he built that river up with some blocks there. Talked to him for some time. Baker River, she's sold out. She doesn't have anybody. They store the campers like Riverfront on 25 down by Susan's business. Has $400 per season, which is the 4 months to store those. I don't see too many people with boats going to Stinson Lake. We can't even use Stinson Lake.
If I may for a moment.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So, as far as coming to the planning board for a kind of conceptual review here, so what we can offer is guidance in the process, and kind of help you kind of think about the application, which I know here it is, the application and the site plan review regulations and that sort of thing. Obviously,
I was hoping to pick your brain specifically to see what do you think the town needs, and then get A from you, B from Rebecca, C from Phil, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I think I could sell Kool-Aid and worms and still make the rent there.
see, ultimately, that's
Whether or not you'll let me.
ultimately that's not really our choice what you want to do there,
Okay.
as long as it's in conformity with our zoning ordinance.
Are you thinking together, like kids tequila, like Kool-Aid with worms?
No, never. There's a little girl down by Stella's that kills it with her private wood she sells and jewelry and stuff, but I was gonna see if she'd become a partner.
I mean, so we can kind of help you out a little bit thinking about the actual process and of applying. Ultimately, you're going to have to come up with a site plan that's a bit more detailed than this.
This is an 09 plan. I just blocked that out at the
Yeah.
UPS store across the way because it seemed like
As outlined, and I guess you have a copy of our site plan review.
I got everything. I just
okay.
again wanted to ask you for the second time, what do you think Plymouth could possibly use? A taxi service there, a horse and carriage, electric bikes? I don't know what up here. I'm hoping that you enlighten me just with one.
I'm not sure
one idea.
It's really our role to do that.
Okay,
You're kind of
then
reversing.
you don't have to. You can pass, and I can ask Rebecca.
I really can't think of it.
You're reversing the process where usually you would come to us.
Okay, I apologize.
We haven't been asked to be a business incubator brainstorming session before, so it's, yeah, I mean, I think we could all have different ideas of what would be the best business out there, or like what we'd like to see out there, but I agree, I don't think it's really our role to determine what the business is. It's really just to see, to make a determination whether or not it fits within our site plan regs, or our zoning ordinance. I mean, the vehicular sales and repair, you can have in the ICD, so.
You can?
Mhm.
Right, but
Vehicular
isn't the
sales and repair.
state, isn't the state a whole separate entity from you guys, the town? Once you get the approval, you have to go to the state, and then do you need, i.e. a building? With sanitation and water?
Did we address that with the,
Versus a TP or construction trailer or sitting in my truck?
Well, I mean, anything you'd construct or anything you'd put on the site for a
Permanent structure.
for use permanently for your offices and anything like that would have to pass site plan review regulations
I'm
and
familiar.
our zoning ordinance, as well as all the building codes and all, you know.
Right. So I'm new to town, 1 year old. And again, I think you have the best town on the planet. It's not dirty, and if you need trash cans, I'll donate them all day. But with that being said, there was a building there. I work for Aaron and Colby. I pick up his trash at his house up in Holderness. And that building was a little construction building. It's red in nature. It's down by Colby Skis on the left before you get to the Rotary going to Big Daddy Joe's and the last chair. And that building was okayed before the board, depending on how long you guys have been sitting on this board. Again, I don't know what that is. I know in '09, I know here's a beautifully drawn plan, about $4,500. And they used to sell mobile homes before Jeremy Hiltz was there. And Jeremy Hiltz rented it right out of the gate for 2 months for Mr. Clay's son, and then they were there 10 years.
So, I mean, I guess the question is, it's not so much like what has been built in other places over the years.
Yeah, there's nothing built, it's completely flat land.
It has to do with what you're proposing for this property.
Again, I would
as it
like
relates
to do,
our
in a perfect world, RV
regulations.
sales and RV rental and RV storage.
Yes.
And be able to take a Mercedes and trade toward the RV that costs $100,000.
So do you have, I mean, I guess specific questions about the process, about like the notification, like the listing of abutters and?
Nope, figured that out with Joe. He's already come out 115 feet on the GPS. Quite more abutters than I thought, just the two. George's and the other one, even across the street I've got to go.
And you understand setbacks and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and you were just talking about setbacks, and it's lower, it's flat land, it's porous, the water flows, there's a stone wall on the backside by the Shaker Bridge. I just want to park RVs there, side by side, put big green stickers
So,
on them.
I guess from our perspective, I mean, you have to decide what you want to do there.
Again,
And
third time I'd like to do that.
make sure it's within our zoning ordinance and regulations.
Okay.
That it fits all of that, and your building fits our design guidelines and all that kind of stuff.
I'd
we
like
have
to
in there.
address a question of Rebecca. She seems to be extremely knowledgeable.
that's his job.
And,
My bad.
now I'm losing my train of thought. But yeah, so make sure all of that is ticked off, and
Right, there's a checklist in the handbook and everything, right?
and make sure then, obviously it's not going to be this, right? But you have a site plan that's, and if you need, use
It's
all
gonna
the-
be this,
use
'cause
all the
I'm,
help-
I'm just me that
Yeah.
picks up trash and lifts rocks and dig drain and
and
water
as
and sewer.
necessary
treatment.
for,
Yep.
making this,
Can I just jump in to
consulting
kind
an
of
engineer
here a little
or,
bit?
yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to, it's hard to, I'm sorry to be kind of interrupting here, but,
She doesn't
you know,
have
I think, there's a little confusion about what this conceptual conversation is with the planning board. The board, Anthony, responds to applications, and you need to come up with a plan on a piece of paper that's
Right.
accurate to show the
I'm
type of
familiar with
business
that.
you're planning to have. If it's RV sales, then lay out where they're gonna be, how you're gonna operate there. And the issue about if you're gonna have an office, then that would need to have some type of water and sewer to it to
Right.
operate out of. So you need to think through all those pieces. The site plan review regulations give a lot of guidance. There's a checklist in the application.
Correct.
I know you've talked to staff quite a bit, but at this point, you're gonna have to work that out, probably, but with, some other, we're not gonna be your consultant to do that. We
Right.
can't help you anymore with it, basically.
Okay.
So you need to try to pull it together into the application and then resubmit it. But from what you're saying tonight, it sounds like you're not even sure the type of business there. So make that decision, do a business plan, you know, kind of come up with what you need, and then pull together the application. I mean, typically, we often see, you know, like engineers or surveyors, or, you know, there's planning consultants out there that can help you with that. But the role of town staff, you know, is to give you the regulations and help with you, but we can't do it for you, and neither can the planning board. So I really encourage you to just kind of pull back and think through what you need to do to have that come together, and then resubmit it, and then we'll take it from there.
I have done
We
that.
can't just keep.
No, I know.
Yeah, but
So
we
I've,
can't
I've
just
only
keep
consulted
having
with Joe Perez.
conversations about
Right,
this
Joe
stuff.
Perez and Mr.
Yeah.
Wheaton. So you had stated
Yes, I know
too,
you
also an
have.
office. So if I do anything on that property, I need the office, period, is what you're saying, right?
It depends on what you want to do there, so you need to decide what you want to do and how it's going to lay out, and how you can meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance, which lay out setbacks, and then the site plan review that will show, you know, where's the traffic coming in, you know, we need to have permission from DOT because it's coming off of the state highway, and Smithbridge Road is also there, so they need to okay changes in traffic flow there, that kind of thing. So you've got a lot of decisions you have to make about the type of business and how it's going to function on that site. And then you kind of just draw a map it out on your lot, but it has to be accurate so we know where things are going to be. And then the board will review it to see if the application is complete, and if it is, then they'll decide kind of, does it meet the standards? And that's where they'll look at the layout, traffic impacts,
Right,
potential
that's pretty black and
stormwater.
white,
There's
yep.
been a yeah. Okay.
So I
think
just
you
don't
need to
know
get,
if I'm gonna
you know,
have
some-
4 40-footer campers or 4 30s or 4 28s. I don't know how I'm gonna start off. I don't have $6 million to fill up the lot, you know. I did a preliminary drawing
Well, we-
and spoke with Mr. Wheating. I know.
We
I
don't
was-
need to know what vehicles you're gonna have there, like,
Yeah.
ultimately, as long as you have a defined place for them.
So it does fall under the used car and truck sales
You know,
subtitle?
I can't speak with 100% surety on whether or not.
Or is it a separate entity or
if an
class?
RV is separate from a car.
So,
Car sales are
again,
allowed.
he needs to figure this out and create a complete application and then bring that. I think the discussion tonight is just getting a little,
Yeah, no problem. Sorry about that.
we can't answer those
Yep.
questions, so
Well, I
until
just
we
wanted
know
to-
what they are.
right.
all right?
Because Mr. Wheaton said I have to have sanitation, I couldn't have a porta potty, and I had to have running water.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense to me if I didn't have an office or a building. That wasn't gonna pay taxes till I grew to build that office or building.
If you're proposing permanent toilets, then
Nobody's proposing to
I
permit
mean-
toilet. A porta potty's portable, that's hence the word.
but if it's gonna be there permanently,
So we do have a provision for this, and this might be just
Yeah.
for the board to think about. We were thinking more dwellings when we did our temporary uses and structures addition to the zoning ordinance, but temporary permits may be issued by the selectmen for a period not exceeding 1 year, incidental to construction projects.
I did talk to the girl at Plymouth Wastewater, and she said it was not applicable. So I would have just storage there with the vehicles being stored, like new car has the front line. Right. Okay,
At this
sorry,
point-
I just was hoping for clarification
Yeah.
to see if I could do it or not, that's all.
Storage would be different than sales.
yeah,
Same
so,
thing to me, you know? There's 4 for storage, I get 400 apiece, there's 69, and paid the monthly rent. If I sell one, because somebody wants to buy it and I own it, you know what I mean?
I lost my,
No worries, thanks for your time, sorry to ask stupid questions.
Wish you luck with it.
I closed up my, where's my agenda?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Thank you, Mike. All right, thank you. Thank you. So I see we have up next unfinished other business from the board members and planning staff. I would remind everybody in here, because I wrote my other agenda somewhere, do we need more signatures?
We only, after tonight, we have 2 signatures left to go, and that's just from Zach Terrell and Peter Julia.
Okay. Is there any other unfinished business?
The only thing I'd like to remind, we had some members of the public that were in attendance tonight.
Yes.
That I felt like there might have been a few people who had comments on the zoning discussion, and I wanted to remind the public that the potential zoning changes that we were discussing tonight will be put forth in a hearing where the public can offer a comment.
I didn't mention that this time. Thank you.
2 hearings.
Yeah, at least two.
Yeah.
So there will be future comment for, future opportunity for comment on the proposed zoning changes, just in case anybody really wanted to talk about that tonight.
Late this year, early next year.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Are there public comments?
On anything other?
Unrelated to our business tonight?
Oh.
Oh, did you need motion? Is that what
I
you're
don't
looking
need,
for?
I can just sit here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if you, yeah, I would make a motion to adjourn.
I second that.
So we have a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned at 8:44.
I'm overruled, it's fine.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night. Good meeting.